first of all, welcome. I'm so excited for this. What got you into psychology? I mean, I know that your background is from a more broad sense psychology. How did you get into sports specific and elite performance?
Great. So I trained as a clinical psychologist after doing my undergraduate bachelor's degree in psychology. And that gave me an opportunity to develop a skill set around supporting people who are experiencing a range of different mental health and well-being challenges, ranging from things like depression and anxiety, which are collectively called common mental disorders, to more lower prevalence kinds of challenges, more pronounced psychological difficulties, including complex mental health difficulties like psychosis. So that was a great grounding for me. But I've always been passionate about sport, Julia, and it was a lovely opportunity for me then as my career developed to really bring that focus on mental health and well-being into high performance environments, including sport, to help athletes who might be experiencing mental health challenges, but also to think proactively with them about things that they can be doing to safeguard themselves against the risk of developing mental health difficulties in what are very high pressure environments. So yeah, that was the development really. That was the evolution and the focus of my work.
So you didn't start in sports. You didn't start with a sports psychology focus. What is the difference in the work that you do between working with elite athletes and business owners and then any individual clients that you now work with?
Yeah, I think the high pressure environment is a common theme. So I do a lot of consulting with business executives as well, who are experiencing the risk of burnout, very highly committed individuals as well. So there are synergies, if you like, between the work I would do consulting with business executives and also athletes. And I'm particularly interested in trying to strike a balance, if you like, between that drive that we all have within us to strive for good outcomes, to strive for goals and achievement, and to help people really balance that get mode, as I call it, with also the threat mode, which can be there because we are worried about how other people might perceive us. We're worried about the risk of failure. We're worried about looking bad in front of other people. So we do have our threat mode as well. And arguably in modern life, the get mode and the threat mode are all very highly activated. And perhaps there's not enough focus on this third motivational mode, which I refer to as the reset mode. So, three motivational modes: get, threat, and reset. One's dealing with striving, one's dealing with surviving, and then the reset mode is about reviving. So, in the work with business executives and the works with that I do with athletes, you see that, yeah, those get and threat modes get very highly activated, and there's perhaps not enough emphasis on the reset mode. And there are risks then of burnout for those individuals that I'm working with.
I mean, I feel like those of us who advocate for sports psychology resources talk about that threat mode and the get mode a lot. And we kind of all allude to the reset. How do you see the process of resetting differ between the populations that you work with?
Yeah, I think there perhaps I'll begin with the commonalities. So broadly speaking, I think we can think about the reset mode being divided into two different types of reset. The first that I'd like to focus on are momentary moves. So momentary moves are things that we can do when we recognize that our stress levels are high or the pressures are there and they're acutely there. So those are momentary moves that we can engage in to help reset. So I like to then subdivide those momentary moves into three different categories that all relate to what are called transcendent emotions, emotions that help us to extend beyond focus on us as individuals. So the three different types of transcendent emotions that can be really good for those momentary moves are things like wonder. So really taking a moment to appreciate the vastness of the solar system in comparison to us, taking a moment to stand under the aurora borealis. We've been blessed, I think, this last 12 months to experience those moments of wonder. So there's wonder, there's also gratitude. So that's a transcendent emotion that is about connecting us with others and those opportunities that we can have to express gratitude towards others. Then there's also this third transcendent emotion, which is about compassion, and that's about demonstrating kindness towards others, or indeed being kinder to ourselves. So, yeah, momentary moves can be initiated through connecting with those transcendent emotions of wonder, gratitude, and compassion. But then the second category of reset moves are what I call bold moves, and they can often seem almost paradoxical, counterintuitive. And those might involve, for example, taking time, planning time away from the humdrum drive of day-to-day life to allow yourself the opportunity to reconnect with your sense of purpose, to revitalize your energy levels. It may indeed be about stepping away from some existing commitments so that you can have that opportunity to recharge. It may involve plotting and planning a new direction in one's career that helps us to realign with our purpose. Because with the best will and intention in the world, we can start on a track and we can keep going on that track. And eventually we realize actually this is the journey that we really want to be engaged in at this stage of our life. We may be ending up pursuing someone else's dream rather than our own. So having those bold moves to take that time to reset and realign with our purpose can be important too. So I think it's helpful to answer your question, to think about the commonality in those reset moves and what that might look like for the individual will vary depending on the context. That reset will look perhaps a bit different for an athlete compared to a business executive. But even within athletes, Julia, they're a diverse group, really important to recognize that. Some athletes will be at the start of their career, whereas others might be contemplating the transition out of sport. So it's very much about tailoring the commonality to the individual and thinking about, well, how can I help bring those resets into the life of the individual that I'm working with?
How do you relate and find that starting point for all of these individuals who are at completely different places in their relationship with their mental wellness? I mean, how do
Yeah.
you figure out where to start?
Yeah, I think something that became apparent to me very early in my career was that people can struggle sometimes to talk about their difficulties, the sources of stress, and indeed the sources of distress that they might be experiencing. And it's so important in the assessment work I do with clients to really have conversations that also tap into what it is that they're passionate about, what it is that they're yearning for, what it is they long for in life. And that's a different type of conversation, both of which are really important. But yeah, I'm really interested in the work that I do with clients to talk about their personal values. What is it that they want to really bring through and how they are in the world? What qualities do they want to bring to how they're interacting with themselves or how they're interacting with other people? So that can be a really nice starting point to actually focus on personal values and how the person wants to be, because there can be so much focus on outcomes and goal achievement, and perhaps not enough focus on how what people want to be as they engage in the processes that can ultimately lead to those positive outcomes. So yeah, a focus on personal values and more broadly as well on this notion of purpose. And what is it that matters to the person? What contribution do they want to make to the world beyond themselves? And I think purpose is so important on a number of different levels. Purpose helps to vindicate. So it vindicates the sacrifices that we have to make in life. Because if we're working to achieve our goals, it will involve sacrifice. So if we can connect our efforts to that sense of purpose that matters to us, that can help vindicate that. I think also purpose can also serve to motivate when we really connect with what it is that is intrinsically important to us. That can be the fire that really helps to propel us forward. But importantly, I think purpose also illuminates. It helps us to understand the pain and the difficult emotions that can arise as we're working towards something that is truly important to us. Because ultimately, if it wasn't important, then we wouldn't worry about it. So when we experience the worry, it's often an opportunity to appreciate that this is because it's something that truly does matter to you. And that's why the pain is there.
When you're trying to define success
Hmm.
and through success find someone's purpose,
Hmm.
well, I guess a better question is which comes first? Do they strive
Yeah.
for success or do they strive for purpose?
I think that's great that you noticed that, right? And that's the direction I was going to take it. That, often we have this assumption that success will lead to happiness. And we have seen so many athletes and indeed business executives talk about what's referred to as the arrival fallacy. You work for an Olympic cycle, right, for 4 or 5 years to get yourself into a space where you can compete at an Olympic Games, and your performance at those games could go different ways. People could enjoy high levels of success. They could set a PB on this world stage, or they could indeed medal, which is fantastic. And clearly, only a limited number of people can medal, by virtue of that system. And they can think to themselves, wow, I've achieved, I've established myself, I have arrived. And then within 24 hours, and perhaps less than that, they can feel this massive void, this sense of emptiness, and this almost sense of despair about, well, where to next? And what am I going to direct myself towards now that that cycle has completed? So it's the arrival fallacy. There's a sense that once we achieve success, then life will finally make sense and we'll be complete. But often people are left to feel emptiness as opposed to a real sense of fulfillment. So I think you were right to catch that and to ask the question about, well, which comes first? And I think one of the problems with contemporary understanding about success is that it's a binary thing, right? You either succeed or you don't. And for me, success is about traveling well in pursuit of the goals that you might be setting, holding yourself to a high standard, but doing it with a level of self-compassion as well, and being able to commend and appreciate yourself for the sacrifices that you've made, for the performance that you've been able to deliver, good, bad, or indifferent, and to recognize that there are opportunities to realign with that sense of purpose that does matter to you. So, yeah, success too often regarded as a binary thing. For me, it's more about the processes that we're engaging in and engaging in them well so that we allow those personal values that matter to us to come through in how we are in the world.
When you're working with clients, specifically in the, I'll say 21 to 35
Yep.
range, who have grown up with these
Yep.
and have compared themselves and been lost in that if I work hard enough, I'll get to
Hmm.
this space that I see everyone else at. Or
Hmm.
I'm just not working hard enough to get to that point because I see everyone else achieving and I'm feeling left behind.
Hmm.
I mean, social media, I talk to so many of my guests about the impact of specific to mental wellness
Hmm.
and how comparison is just the thief of joy.
Right.
When you work with that population, whether they be in business or elite athletics, what are some of the things that you hear continued in their mindsets towards
Hmm.
success?
Yeah, great. And I think I could be as quick on the draw as you were, right? And it's really interesting how close our devices are to us, right? They're
I don't
never,
really want to talk
far
about it.
away. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword that the technology is a great thing and it's also a problematic thing. And those gadgets have literally tens of thousands of people behind them designing them so that we as individuals will interact with them more, right? So that's a battle that we'll struggle to win. There are certainly approaches, techniques, strategies that we can employ. So, yeah, make it more difficult to engage with the device. So, if we can get into the way of leaving our phone beyond the arm's reach, that can be a good thing. There are, of course, apps on our devices that can restrict our level of interaction with them, right? So that's an interesting idea as well, that the technology is a tiger that we can ride on the back of as opposed to being consumed by, if that makes sense. But I like to say to my clients, particularly in that age group, let's look beyond the devices. They're important, but let's look to some other important opportunities to learn. And I think nature is a great teacher, particularly in relation to what it takes to thrive. Like, look at my yucca plant in the background there. It's thriving. Well, how does it do that? I think there are certainly things that we can learn from nature about how we can thrive. That's really what inspired me to write my recent book, The Tree That Bends, How a Flexible Mind Can Help You Thrive. And it really does draw on the anatomy and the functioning of a tree as a central metaphor to help us understand, well, what does it take to thrive? So for me, I think the this idea of psychological flexibility is a great thing that demographic can use nature as a reference point to kind of apply in their own life. So just like the tree has its anatomy, right? It has its roots that anchor it to the ground. Well, I think it's important for us to be anchored in the here and now. Too often in life, we're thinking about stuff that's happened yesterday, or we're worrying about stuff that's going to happen tomorrow, what we might be missing on social media, right? So it's important to come back to the here and now, be anchored in this time and place. Trees have their trunks that will bend in the wind, that will sway, that absorb some of the energy from the wind, and the tree can use that, if you like, to right itself by that elasticity that the trunk has. And likewise, I think we need to also be willing, like the trunk of a tree, to lean into some of the difficult emotions and feelings and thoughts that will show up in your day, that show up in my day, that it's too easy for us to try to distract ourselves from, right? And social media is a great distraction. It's a great procrastination. And in some ways, it's maybe easier than showing up to some of those icky feelings and thoughts that we experience. So, yeah, I'm working with my clients to help them use strategies to be more willing to lean into the stuff that they might be motivated to try to avoid or distract themselves from. And then the tree also has its crown, which is the leaves and its branches that allow it to photosynthesize, to really harness the sun's energy to fuel the tree. Well, we have our source of energy, if you like. It's the opportunities we have to be empowered by our personal values and by our sense of purpose. So yeah, nature is the teacher. Be anchored, be willing, be empowered. And that's how we can really embrace the psychological flexibility to thrive in the here and now.
I was trying to tee you up for that exact answer
I think you did
because
quite well then.
because I read The Tree That Bends.
Mhm.
And it was an incredible look into being vulnerable and mental toughness and how to thrive. I mean, that
Mhm.
is kind of your entire business model, is it not? I mean, how do I get this person to work with what they're already, the point they're already at, and get them to thrive?
Yeah.
And I loved the way that your book was set up because it was all about the mindset and breaking down the individual thought processes into catchy terms and applicable anecdotes. And it was a very easy read. I flew through the book because I couldn't put it down.
Wow.
Um,
I'm
I
glad.
yeah, I'm so thankful that I got a copy of it. I mean, I I obviously have a vested interest in this, but if I was starting from square one and trying to learn more about my starting point with my relationship with the mind and my purpose and my drive, I think that this book would do a really good job of challenging me to figure out what that first step is.
Mm.
And I really enjoyed it. Like I truly did. So thank you. Thank you for coming on and talking about it.
Well, I'm thrilled that you enjoyed it. Thrilled that you read it. Thrilled that you enjoyed it. And those are lovely words by way of feedback. And, the fact that you're seeing the potential value of that for someone who's starting out in their journey. That's lovely feedback. So I really appreciate you doing that and taking the time to do that.
What inspired you to write this specific book? Because there
Hmm.
are a lot of different ways that you could have come across this information and presented it. I mean,
Yeah.
this book was so well researched.
Yeah.
So where do you start when you're planning out what
Yeah.
information you want to tell?
Well, there's been a journey. So I'm really interested in acceptance and commitment therapy or acceptance and commitment training, also referred to as ACT. I'm a trainer of the approach. I have benefited enormously from learning from other trainers of the approach. And ACT as an intervention is really interested in helping to build psychological flexibility. And athletes and business executives get the notion of psychological flexibility. People can understand the benefits of physical flexibility and how that can help prevent injury, help to rehabilitate following injury, the benefits of yoga and being more pliable and supple for our circulation, for our mind as well. So when people start to recognize the importance of psychological flexibility, that's a great way in, right? So people understand that notion of flexibility and how it can be important for both body and mind. And I really have found ACT as a form of support really helpful for both business executives and athletes, and they seem to derive good benefit from it. And I worked with some colleagues to put together a book which was really aimed at practitioners, people like sports psychologists, coaches, also those who are involved in supporting the mental health and well-being of athletes too. And it was called Acceptance and Commitment Approaches for Athletes' Well-being and Performance. And the subtitle was The Flexible Mind. And yeah, after writing that book, Julia, it was a bit like, well, that's great that it's out there for practitioners, but I'm really keen to try to reach people directly, people who are committed to excellence in whatever they might be doing, school teacher, accountant, NFL player, soccer player, whatever that might be. So that motivated me then to write The Tree That Bends. And the title comes from a Tanzanian proverb. So the wind does not break the tree that bends, which is a metaphor that I first heard whenever I was doing some mental health related work in sub-Saharan Africa. And the name of the book just crystallized around that metaphor. And Yeah, so I've always been fascinated by nature, whether it's forests, coastal blue water by the sea, inland blue water, lakes, and I just thought, yeah, let's help people learn more about themselves and in the process learn more about nature. And the book flowed from there.
So what were you doing in Tanzania? Were
Yeah,
you
it
in
was
Tanzania?
actually Uganda and Rwanda. So I am involved in work aimed at supporting forcibly displaced people, refugees. And yeah, that part of East Africa does have very high numbers of forcibly displaced people due to conflicts. So part of that work was about understanding linguistically how people talk with each other about the struggles that they might be experiencing, but also ideas of resilience. And yeah, that was where the tree that bends and the wind does not break the tree that bends came. It was a Tanzanian proverb about resilience.
When you're looking at culturally the way that mental toughness, mental wellness is interpreted,
Mhm.
what are the inherent differences between a place like Uganda and
Mhm.
Ireland and Canada and the US?
Yeah, it's a great question. So people again will draw reference from the worlds in which they live and the environments in which they live, but also the languages that they speak. And that fascinates me how we understand the emotional experiences that we're having and how we talk about them. And I remember hearing a number of years ago this metaphor that, as I understand it, is spoken in the Welsh language, right? Which is a form of Celtic language spoken by a proportion of the population mainly living in Wales as part of the UK. And the metaphor, the idiom, the linguistic expression of the distress was he has his head buried in his feathers, using the analogy of a bird. And you may have some personal experience or seen some images about how birds, when they're cold or when the environment around them is quite difficult, they will bury their head in their feathers to try to warm themselves up or to protect themselves from threat. So that idea about someone who's experiencing some mental distress and struggles burying their head in their feathers was really a powerful visual image of what that person might be going through. In the Irish language, you don't say, I am depressed. The way you express it is that you say the depression is on you. The depression is upon me. And for me, I think that opens up so many other avenues about how you can then talk about what you might do to help alleviate or mitigate the circumstances that you're actually under. Whereas in English, we define ourselves on the basis of the state that we can experience. We say, I am depressed, which can feel really oppressive as a way, we're equating ourselves with the state and, in terms of wiggle room that might afford compared to other ways of expressing it linguistically. But in places like the UK and perhaps North America, you can tell me if I'm wrong here. We might say things like, I am blue. I feel blue. And in the UK, if I was to speak to someone about that, they would recognize that what I mean by that is that I feel low in mood. But if I was to say that to a colleague in Uganda or Rwanda, they would be deeply confused by that. That idiom doesn't translate that well. So yeah, I'm fascinated by language, by different cultures, and how people will find ways of sharing with each other what might be going on for them that perhaps make no sense to somebody beyond that cultural context.
That is a fascinating take because through over 100 episodes now, the majority of my guests have come from English speaking countries, first
Mm,
world countries. I mean, they are elite athletes. They've been catered to their entire lives. They're well educated, and they have this group of individuals who kind of help foster the conversation surrounding what your identity is.
Yeah.
But I think when you're speaking English, the onus is definitely on you equating yourself to
Hmm.
these feelings, not the feelings, and being synonymous with those feelings,
Yeah.
as opposed to saying this feeling is happening to me,
Yes.
it is not me.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. And in the book, one of the points that I'm at pains to emphasize is that we have thoughts and feelings. Those thoughts and feelings don't have us, right? And as difficult and as oppressive and as challenging as particular emotions might be, there are things that we can do to shift our relationship with those thoughts and feelings so that they no longer block or impede our progress towards those goals that matter to us. And that's what ultimately psychological flexibility is. It's about having difficult thoughts and feelings and still doing those things that matter to us. So shifting the relationship so those thoughts and feelings aren't blocking us from doing the stuff that matters to us.
You mentioned in your book at some point, you called it psychological jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And I just loved that phrase. Why do you think that human nature's relationship with mental wellness feels so difficult?
Hmm. Yeah, and the psychological jiu-jitsu, I historically have been engaged in martial arts. So for many years have practiced jiu-jitsu, the Japanese version, so the World Jiu-Jitsu Federation. In recent decades, Brazilian jiu-jitsu has become very popular, and in UFC, for example, mixed martial arts, and the Japanese iteration of jiu-jitsu literally translates as the compliant art. The compliant art. And what does that mean? Well, ultimately, with jiu-jitsu, what you're doing is using your opponent's momentum against them. So it's not a battle of strength. It's not head on. It's about the flow. And as your opponent directs momentum against you, you flow with that and ultimately are seeking to use that against them. So I just thought that was a lovely way of capturing the notion of psychological flexibility. It's not about stubbornly resisting or trying to suppress or get rid of difficult thoughts and feelings because ultimately that proves to be counterintuitive. So if I said to you, Julia, don't think about a pink elephant, whatever you do, do not think about a pink elephant, you end up and that, don't think about messing up, Ross. Don't think about tripping over your words in this podcast interview. And if I was to dwell a lot on that thought, it would take me right out of the opportunity to dynamically and flexibly and fluidly interact with you, right? So I think just to pick up and ensure that I was really addressing the question that you had posed.
Yeah.
An important point that I want to emphasize is that social media can serve to reinforce really compelling messages about what it seems is important for success. And there are very persuasive, very compelling practitioners out there who have had really rich experience in elite high stress environments who do a great job at promoting these messages. And it's that kind of David Goggins, Jocko Willink, taking the photo of your watch at 4:38 a.m. To start your day and running along, doing your endurance run and talking to camera and finishing your video with stay hard. And yeah, that's a compelling sell. And it's almost picking up on some of those doubts and insecurities we have within ourselves about, well, am I being productive enough? Hey, I'm only getting up at 7 in the morning. Should I be getting up at the 5 a.m. sort of start? Or am I staying hard enough? Or am I being too soft on myself? And yeah, I'm not going to dispute the value that some of those qualities can have in terms of being gritty, being committed, being conscientious, being hardworking. That stuff's all good in some regards, depending on the context. That's important because some of those traits, whilst they might be excellent in the gym or on the treadmill or on the roads, they may not lend themselves particularly well to other environments, other contexts, like a home life where we're trying to maintain intimacy in our relationships, right? And taking time to take care of other people as well as taking care of ourselves. But the point that I think the psychological jiu-jitsu speaks to and psychological flexibility speaks to is the idea that, well, in particular contexts, it's going to be important to bring forward other traits, dare I say, less sexy, less compelling traits like, the rest well as a catchphrase doesn't really stack up to the stay hard type, David Goggins thing, but it's important. It's really important. Be kind to yourself. How many likes might that get compared to some of those more compelling stories about gritty sort of attributes? But this stuff really matters. So we have, if you like, a skewed sense of what seems to be really important. There's a bit of a bias in what comes through on our social media feeds because the extraordinary stuff tends to get highlighted more than the ordinary, but no less important stuff.
Do you think that grit or resilience are a more important attribute to have?
Yeah, great. It depends. I'm such a psychologist with an answer like that, aren't I? But again, I'm going to bring it back to context. So resilience is a word that gets bandied around a lot, and it's a catch-all phrase that can be used to capture distinct elements of our experience. So, for example, resilience can be used to highlight somebody who goes through adversity, has a dip in their level of functioning, but then is able to quickly come back to the kind of normal level of functioning. Now, that can be called rebound resilience, right? That idea of, okay, initial dip, but come back and they're back at it, performing as they were. Resilience can also be used to describe someone who has an experience of adversity but remains unaffected by that adversity, and that's referred to as robust resilience. Then you have people who experience adversity and seem to come back stronger for it, right? And that's the idea of post-traumatic growth that Tedeschi and Calhoun highlighted and has become quite popular in our understanding of high performance environments. But the important thing about resilience is that it's indexed from an experience of adversity, right? And that begs the question about, well, what if somebody's been ticking along? There hasn't necessarily been anything that's been traumatic or adverse in their day-to-day experience. Can we still use the notion of resilience? So, yeah, I think resilience is a helpful concept, but it maybe refers to a particular set of circumstances and it has to be understood in a very nuanced way. Well, what do we really mean when we're using that word resilience? Grit is the work that Angela Duckworth has done, and it's based on her work with in educational settings and military settings that have really served to highlight the importance of grit for success in the longer term. And grit can be thought of as, yeah, this sense of having a passion. So being clear on something that is important and matters to us, and having, if you like, the perseverance to see it through. But one of the criticisms of grit is that, well, is it not really conscientiousness? Is that not what we're talking about here? And what might grit be offering that's different from this quality of conscientiousness that we've known about for a long time? And another concern for me about grit is, well, does it value consistency over adaptability? So I could consistently, in a gritty way, bang my head up against a brick wall. And it's not really going to do the wall that much good. It's certainly not going to do my head much good. But arguably, it's fitting with this notion of conscientiously, consistently, in a gritty way, doing something. Whereas the adaptability piece is, well, uh, this isn't working as a strategy. I need to change up. And perhaps that's where grit falls down because it doesn't really speak to our capacity to change up when we need to. So certainly in some circumstances, those qualities of grit or conscientiousness are going to be valuable. But if we are just blindly applying grit as the key, irrespective of what the circumstances, irrespective of the need for us to actually be adaptable rather than consistent, then grit can start to fall down. So hopefully that explains that, look, those concepts can be important, but it depends on the context, and let's be more nuanced about what we're actually meaning when we're using those terms.
In a similar vein, do you think that resilience is, do you think that your ability to be resilient hinges on your adaptability or your drive more so?
Mhm. Yeah. So adaptability or drive in the context of resilience, what's primary? Is that the
Yeah.
question?
When you're looking at trying to be resilient, is
Hmm.
the overwhelming factor drive or is it adaptability?
Hmm. Yeah, I
What
think
creates a more resilient person?
for me, honestly, it's more about the psychological flexibility piece. And why am I banging on about psychological flexibility? Well, the benefits I think that it offers in addition to resilience is that psychological flexibility doesn't need to be indexed against adversity, whereas the resilience does. So I can absolutely be psychologically flexible in how I respond to adversity, but I can also be psychologically flexible in the absence of the adversity too. So I think that's where it perhaps has a broader range of application. And I see psychological flexibility as a really important contributing factor to our ability to be resilient if and when the adversity does come.
It's a great answer. We were talking earlier about your work with refugees. Can you also talk about your work with the WHO?
Yeah. So the World Health Organization are an organization that have done fantastic work to develop what are called scalable psychological interventions. So what does scalable mean? Well, it's a pragmatic response to the fact that we don't have enough highly trained, dare I say, expensive to employ professionals in vast swathes of the world. And I'm particularly referring to low and middle income countries. So, yeah, scalable psychological interventions are intended to reach broad numbers of people because we have to recognize that the vast majority of the world's population actually live in low and middle income countries where those highly trained individuals professionals aren't working. So yeah, those scalable interventions have been developed by the WHO to reach these broad populations in the absence of highly skilled professionals. So what do those look like? Well, they can be self-help. So often in the form of booklets, illustrated booklets, to help people understand the nature of their thoughts and their feelings. They can also be guided self-help. So there can be some audio that people might listen to in addition to illustrated guidebooks, etc. And they can also be facilitated. So we take community workers, train them up as group facilitators, and they can help to disseminate the intervention. So I've been fortunate to collaborate on research projects with the WHO that have evaluated ACT-based forms of self-help, and the intervention is called Self-Help Plus. And yeah, the WHO did extensive work to ensure that it was linguistically and culturally adapted for refugee populations in Uganda. So, South Sudanese women who were being accommodated in Uganda. We did a research project evaluating Self-Help Plus with them, and it was shown to be successful. And then we also did a research trial in Europe, and I was leading one of the UK site in this European trial that sought to evaluate Self-Help Plus to see if it was effective at reducing the likelihood of refugees developing mental disorders. So again, there were positive findings. So Self-Help Plus is now being disseminated globally through the WHO webpage. It's being translated into over 20 different languages. It's been used to good effect with Ukrainian refugees following the unrest that has happened in Ukraine, and also with Syrian refugees following the conflicts that have happened there. So great opportunity to work as part of international teams evaluating the work that the WHO have coordinated.
That's incredible. I mean, you're doing worldwide mental wellness advocacy. How does it feel to know that you are giving these individuals an understanding of themselves?
Yeah, I think that's interesting to reflect on it that way. For me, the joy of the work is in the interaction, whether it be an athlete in front of me, a business executive, whether it be working in conjunction with some of my international colleagues around those projects, whether it's the interaction with you in this conversation that we're having, it's humans doing human things, right? And that's the aspect of the work that really excites me, having the interaction. And yeah, I hope I can be of assistance to others, that they can learn some wisdom from me, but oh gosh, I learned so much from other people, and that's a great thing too. So yeah, I tend to boil it down to ultimately the interpersonal interactions that, and yeah, the work, it's interesting, it can be challenging at times, but it's also inspiring, which is really lovely too.
With the last few minutes of this interview, I would like to come back to your consultant work,
Mhm.
Strive to Thrive. What factored into starting that kind of work up, and what kind of populations do you serve?
Yeah. So in 2015, I set up strive2thrive.co.uk, which is a clinical psychology consultancy organization. And I work 2 days a week in private practice in Strive to Thrive. And I also work 3 days a week at Queen's University in Belfast. And I'm involved in helping to support the training of clinical psychologists in Belfast, which is a really lovely part of the work as well. So Strive to Thrive, yeah, it's working with business executives, it's working with athletes, it's delivering supervision to other psychological practitioners, And I'm fortunate to be able to offer supervision to clinical psychology colleagues, but also to those practitioners who are interested in learning more about ACT and want to use that in their practice. So, yeah, broadly speaking, the kind of Strive to Thrive work breaks down to about 60% of client-facing work and 40% of practitioner-facing work, doing supervision, doing training in acceptance and commitment therapy as well. So the work is rich, it's diverse, and I get to work with some great people. So, yeah, it's a real joy to be able to do it.
Is there anything that you think that I missed about telling your story, your impact on the industry? What drives you? The floor is yours. My
Yeah.
questions are done.
Yeah, I often reflect, Julie, on, well, what is my purpose, right? Because I'm encouraging everybody else to reflect on theirs. And yeah, I think a key purpose for me is to really help people connect with their sense of purpose. And there's a lot talked about, this idea of find your why, right? And people like Simon Sinek have done great work around the importance of not just focusing on the what, right? The kind of outcome, not just thinking on the how, right? The processes that you engage in to get to your what, but also your why. Well, what is it ultimately that is motivating you to engage in those processes to get that outcome? So, yeah, start with why. And yeah, he's talked about find your why. And it's kind of like you walk around the corner and you trip over something. Oh, there's my why. It's been there all along, right? I don't really subscribe to that. I think that our why is formed. It's not found. What do I mean by it's formed? Well, I think the kernels, the seeds of our purpose are already there in the things that bring vitality into our day-to-day life. And we really have to tune into that. We have to listen to what it is that makes our heart sing, that gives us that sense of inspiration and that sense of joy, and really to cultivate that. What can we do to nurture that nascent sense of purpose that could be there for all of us? So I really want people listening to connect with that, yeah, people can feel about, well, yeah, there's all this chat about purpose and what is my purpose and when am I going to find my purpose? It's already there. It's just that you need to form it, to cultivate it, to nourish it, to develop it. Listen to what it is that brings vitality into your day-to-day experience and try to do more of that.
Amen. This episode was lovely. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
It will come out on March 26th. So you
Great.
have a, a fair amount of time. If
Mm,
anything happens that you'd like included between now and then,
yeah,
shoot me an email,
great.
and I'll include it in the script. Thank you so much. Any questions for me before?
No problem. If you could drop me an email, you've got my email address, don't you?
Yeah,
Because I think I'm getting the automated emails through the system, the booking system.
yeah.
And I just want to make sure that I do have your personal email address because
Awesome.
there's the online learning program is coming out as well, the Tree That Bends, and it's like a 9 session totals to about 90 minutes worth of video recorded, pre-recorded stuff. But it really does highlight some of the key learnings from the book, and people can sign up for the course. So I'll maybe send that information through. It's going to launch next week, and it would be good to include maybe in the show notes,
Yeah.
just that people might be interested to check it out.